Hey guys, it's Michael Kummer here. In today's video I want to talk to you about metabolic health and what it means to be metabolically healthy. Now let me ask you a question, and I know I'm not going to be able to see the answer, but do you think you're healthy? Because healthy at the end of the day means the absence of disease. If you're not sick, you ought to be healthy, right? And I would argue that most of you probably think that they're healthy. However, statistics have shown that only 12% of Americans, that's 1 in 8, are metabolically healthy. So how come there is such a discrepancy between most people thinking they are healthy, whereas most of them are actually not? So in this video, I want to talk about the top 12 factors that you can use to assess your own health and to find out how healthy you truly are. Now I should mention I have an in-depth blog post that covers this topic in much more detail than I can here in this video. It also offers some tips and tricks that you can use to improve your health, and it's going to talk about some of the misconceptions. So I highly recommend you check it out. I'm going to link all of that down below in the description. But today, before we get started, make sure you subscribe to this channel and you click on the little alert button so you get notified when I publish more videos like this. Now, one thing that's important before we get started, the 12 factors that I'm going to discuss in this video today, if looked at in isolation or individually, might not be a perfect representation of your health, but if taken together, if you combine them, they paint a fairly clear picture of how healthy and in particular metabolically healthy you are. So keep that in mind. Number one, how do you feel? Now, assessing how you feel is a little bit of a tricky subject, because if you don't truly know or understand what it means to feel great, then you might think how you feel right now is good and how you're supposed to feel. In fact, for most of my life, for over 30 years, I thought that I was feeling great, or good at least on most days. But after I started making certain lifestyle changes and I suddenly experienced how it truly feels to feel great, I realized that how I felt before wasn't good or great. And so you have to be a little bit in tune with your body. It's something that you have to learn. But once you have learned how to listen to your body, then you can very much tell if something is off. I can tell if I slept half an hour less than I needed, if my body might be fighting something, an infection or whatever the case might be. I can feel that. If I feel less than great, I can tell. And so it takes some getting used to, but once you are in tune with your body, you can assess how healthy you are based on how you feel. The second factor is your level of fitness. You should be able to run up a flight of stairs, to pick up heavy stuff like furniture or grocery bags, or to lift your kids up without falling apart and without getting winded. If you can't do those things, then chances are you're not healthy, or there is maybe some sort of metabolic dysfunction going on that prevents you from reaching your optimal or your normal level of fitness. Now, I'm not talking, you don't have to be an elite athlete. You don't have to compete in the Olympics, but you have to do certain things like run up a flight of stairs, jog for a while, be active, throw your kids in the air, pick up heavy stuff without feeling pain or without falling apart. Number 3 is skin health. The skin is an important organ. It's an excellent indication of how metabolically healthy you are. If you suffer from acne, from eczema, from irritations, redness, some other skin conditions, then chances are you're not metabolically healthy. Your skin should be clear and should look good. If it doesn't, something is going on inside of you that's reflected on your skin. Number 4 is metabolic flexibility. Metabolic flexibility is the ability of your body to switch back and forth between different types of fuel for energy. And the two main types of fuel are glucose from the carbohydrates you eat and fatty acids or ketone bodies from either the fat that you consume through your diet or your body fat. And so what a healthy body does is, in the absence of food, it switches to fat metabolism and starts burning your own body fat as a source of fuel or for energy. And if that switch is impaired because you're not metabolically flexible, then you might feel dizzy and lightheaded and hangry and with low energy and headaches and stuff if you have to skip a meal. That's a good indication. If that happens to you, if you cannot easily skip a meal or fast for a day or even for longer if necessary, that's an indication that you're metabolically inflexible, and that's a sign of metabolic dysfunction, meaning that you're not healthy if you're not metabolically flexible. Number 5 is your gut microbiome. The bacteria in your gut play an important role in your overall health. They make vitamins, they make certain fatty acids, they have a lot of control over your overall health. If there is something going on inside of your gut, either a dysbiosis maybe, or a leaky gut, or if you don't have enough diversity of bacteria in your gut, all of that negatively impacts your overall health. So if your gut isn't healthy, you're not healthy. So if you suffer from GI issues, if you have irritable bowel syndrome, if you have Crohn's disease, if you get bloated and pain after meals, etc., all of these are indications that there is something wrong with your gut's microbiome, and that's an indication that you're metabolically not healthy and you suffer from metabolic dysfunction. You should feel good after meals. You should not have any GI issues on a regular basis. If you do, again, that's a sign that there is something wrong. Number 6 is your immune system. Your immune system's job is to prevent you from getting sick, in the simplest way of looking at it. So if you get sick frequently, if you get a lot of colds, strep throat and ear infections and all of those issues that many people suffer from on a regular basis, then chances are your immune system is compromised. And if your immune system is compromised, you are by definition not healthy. There is something going on that prevents you from reaching optimal health. And so in the past, I used to get sick a lot. I had runny noses, colds, flus, all of those things that I consider to be a normal part of life. But now I know that you're not supposed to get sick all the time. It doesn't mean that you can never get sick, but if you get sick frequently throughout the year, chances are your immune system is compromised and you're metabolically not healthy. Number 7 are blood markers. And there are a couple of ones that I want to point out in particular because they're very important. So I get my blood work done every 3 months. I highly recommend that you get a blood panel at least once a year, ideally every 6 months, or even better every 3 months, because that gives you a very clear indication of what's going on inside of your body that you might not be able to see or realize otherwise. And so besides the regular blood panel that you get from your primary care physician, there are a couple of blood markers that are often not included in a regular annual physical. And I highly recommend you ask your doctor to include those. And so I want to cover some of them that I pay very close attention to every time I get my blood work done. Number 1 are my inflammatory markers, and in particular my C-reactive protein, or CRP. CRP is an indication of inflammation, and while the CRP might be elevated temporarily if or after an intense workout, for example, or if you actually have a cold at the time or are sick at the time, your CRP is likely activated because there is inflammation going on. But if it's chronically elevated, that's an indication that you suffer from chronic and systemic inflammation, and that's a hallmark sign of developing a chronic disease in the long run. So your CRP should be low. There should be very little inflammation going on a regular basis. My CRP is typically below 0.3, and so if you don't have the CRP on your regular blood panel, ask a doctor to have that included, because it's a very good indicator of how inflamed your body is. The second one I pay close attention to is my fasting insulin. Fasting insulin should be low. Mine is typically about 1.8. So it should be definitely below 3, because fasting insulin is an indicator of how sensitive your cells are to insulin. If they are not sensitive to insulin, that means you are insulin resistant. And that's an early sign of, or that can be an early indication that you're on your way to type 2 diabetes, and then in the long run, some other metabolic health issues that also go back to insulin resistance, like Alzheimer's. That's why it's called type 3 diabetes, and many of the other chronic diseases, including stroke, cancer, etc. All of that go back to inflammation and insulin resistance to a certain degree. So that's one that I definitely would pay very close attention to. The next one is your hemoglobin A1C. That's your long-term blood sugar. That indicates your blood sugar levels over the past 3 or so months. And so that A1C should be fairly low, as close to 5 or even below 5 as possible, depending on what dietary patterns you follow. Mine is typically around 5.2, but anything that's higher, especially if it's above 6 or above 5.7, I think is the cutoff point, that's an indication that your blood sugar levels are elevated for extended periods. And that's not a good thing, because that could potentially then lead to insulin resistance and to the development of chronic diseases. The next one I pay close attention to are my vitamin D levels. Vitamin D is incredibly important. If you have low vitamin D levels, that has been associated with all kinds of issues, especially also in the context of the current health crisis. So you want to make sure you have sufficiently high vitamin D levels. That means getting out in the sun, exposing your skin without sunscreen to sun every single day if possible. Don't overdo it, don't burn of course, but get your sun exposure, and if necessary, depending on where you live or during the colder months of the season where the sun isn't as strong, get a good vitamin D supplement, ideally in combination with vitamin K, K2, to enhance absorption. And incredibly important, check your vitamin D levels. The next one are my blood lipids, and I don't look at total cholesterol and HDL because they are pretty much irrelevant unless you really follow a crappy diet. But if you have a somewhat decent diet, then your total cholesterol and LDL are pretty much irrelevant from a cardiovascular risk perspective. What I look at are my HDL, my high density lipoprotein, the quote unquote good cholesterol, as well as my triglycerides. And in particular, the triglycerides are an indication of how much energy your body is converting to fat and storing it. So if your triglycerides are high, that's an indication that there is either some sort of metabolic dysfunction going on, or that you're excessively overeating and your body stores a lot of that energy in form of fat. And so your triglyceride should be low, ideally well below 100, and your HDL should be high, ideally above 40. If those two are okay, then I don't really care about some of my other lipids, because again, they're irrelevant from a cardiovascular risk perspective. The next thing I look at is my thyroid hormones and my sex hormones, including testosterone. And it doesn't really matter if you're male or female, testosterone is important. And the problem with, is in particular testosterone levels, are that they have declined over the last couple of decades. And as the general testosterone levels among the population has declined, so have the reference values. So what used to be low testosterone 30 years ago is now considered normal because the average levels have declined so much. And so what's important is, especially with testosterone, especially if you're a biological male, make sure they are on the upper end of what's considered normal. And normal, I think these days, depending on what lab you use to test, somewhere between 250 or 300 to maybe 1100, you want to be in that upper range, regardless of how old you are. So if you're like in the 250, 300s, you have low testosterone, even if you might fall within the normal range. That's not normal. It wasn't normal many years ago, and it's not normal today. So make sure you're in the upper end, maybe in the 800s or so. If not, look at your lifestyle, and again, it's maybe an indication that there is something wrong and you're not entirely healthy. The last thing I look at, not on a regular basis, not every quarter or every year, but every couple of years, I do a calcium score scan. And that, it's like a CT scan that scans your arteries from up here all the way up here, and it checks for calcium deposits or arterial plaque. So if you've been trying to improve your health and overall, you've probably heard that there are certain things that can cause arterial plaque, including high LDL and cholesterol and dietary cholesterol and saturated fats, and that's all BS. None of that causes arterial plaque. What does is highly processed carbohydrates and some other things that I've discussed in much more detail on my blog, so check that out. I'm going to link it down below. But the bottom line is that I get a scan done every couple of years to make sure I don't have any arterial plaque, and I don't. I have this calcium score scan of 0, despite my incredibly high intake of saturated fat, my high cholesterol, my high LDL. So that's again another confirmation that, you know, all of those markers are really irrelevant in terms of accumulating arterial plaque. I don't have any, and you want to check that out because that's ultimately an indication or an assessment of your risk factors for developing cardiovascular disease. Another great indicator of your metabolic health is your dental health. If you have a lot of cavities, if you get cavities a lot, if you have bleeding gums, if you have inflammation in your mouth, that's an indication that you're metabolically not healthy. It's an indication that there is something going on in terms of inflammation in your mouth, And if that's the case, then you likely have inflammation in other parts of your body. You likely suffer from systemic inflammation. Chances are your gut microbiome is not in good shape. There might be leaky gut going on, some other metabolic issues, but the bottom line is, regardless of how often you brush, what type of toothbrush you use, if you floss a lot or not, if you are metabolically healthy, your dental health is good. I don't use toothbrush. I brush twice a day. I floss once a day. If I forget, for whatever reason, it doesn't matter. I don't get any cavities. I used to get a lot of cavities despite brushing 4 times a day, flossing 4 times a day, and rinsing and doing all of those things that my dentist told me to do, and I still got cavities. And only after I changed my lifestyle, and in particular my diet, I got my gut microbiome in order. I reduced inflammation or eliminated inflammation from my body. Suddenly I did not get any more cavities, despite significantly dialing back how often I brush and floss and do all of those things. It's important, if you have a lot of cavities, if you get cavities, you're not metabolically healthy, and it's got nothing to do with your brushing and flossing. Number 9 is a pretty obvious one. Pain. If you're in pain, you're not healthy. Doesn't matter if it's headaches, if it's joint pains, if it's lower back pain, if there is something going on, if you suffer from chronic pain, whatever the type of pain might be, there is inflammation, chronic inflammation going on, and that means you are by definition not healthy. Number 10 is stress. If you're under a lot of stress, chances are you're probably not healthy, or at least not as healthy as you could be, because stress negatively impacts not only hormone levels, your gut microbiome, but really several organs and tissues in your body. And you cannot achieve optimal health while being under chronic stress. Number 11 is sleep. You can only be healthy if you have a consistent and high quality sleep. If you don't, chances are you're not truly healthy, because inconsistent sleep times messes with your circadian rhythm, and every single cell in our body follows that circadian rhythm. The more consistent it is, the more conducive it is to optimal health. If you mess with that circadian rhythm by going to bed at different times every day, maybe once at 8, then at 11, then at midnight, etc. If you have an inconsistent wake time, if you're not in sync with natural light, with the sun, getting up when the sun rises, going to bed when the sun goes down, then you negatively impact your circadian rhythm, and as a consequence, you impact your health. In other words, again, you cannot be healthy if your sleep sucks. Number 12 is menstrual cycles. A menstrual cycle should be consistent, and it should be fairly pain-free. If it's not, chances are something is going on. There is maybe some hormonal imbalance, there is something else going on, maybe some metabolic issue, maybe some thyroid issues, etc., that negatively impact your menstrual cycle. So look out for that. If it's not consistent and pain-free, chances are you're not truly healthy. So I hope in this video I gave you a couple of good pointers that you can use to assess your own health and to find out if there are maybe some areas that you can improve. I go through most of those 12 factors, with the exception of the menstrual cycle, of course, regularly to assess my own health and to see what I could potentially do better to fix something that's not working optimally. Now, in combination with all of the blog posts and videos that I'm going to link down below in the description, hopefully that will also give you an idea of what you can do, what changes you can implement to improve your own health. Now, if you have any questions about the contents of this video or some of my other blog posts and videos, just leave me a comment down below and I'll answer as soon as I can. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it. I hope you got some value out of it. Until next time.